Hi, my name is Bart Cowell, and my presentation is about hot carrier solar cells. The hot carrier solar cell is a promising third-generation photovoltaic device which, utilizing the collection of highly energetic photo-generated carriers, allows energy conversion of up to 65% for unconcentrated illumination. The efficiency gain is realized, minimizing losses due to poor conversion efficiency of photons with energy above the bandgap of the absorber. This represents the main energy loss mechanism in conventional solar cells, which accounts for up to 40% of the total losses. The wide gap between the thermodynamic limit, which is about 90% for solar energy conversion, and the single junction Shockley quasar limit indicates that there's a large amount of room for further improvements of photovoltaic devices. The hot carrier solar cell is one of the most promising third-generation concepts, which aims to reach the efficiency limits close to the thermodynamic limit. The history of the hot carrier solar cell can be traced back to the year 1958, where a scientist named Schaefer had an idea to use the full energy of all photons above a certain energy threshold radiated off by the sun onto the Earth. Schaefer contributed the first non-classical thermodynamics treatment of that conversion process, as seen in this figure. In 1982, Ross and Nozick formulated a thermodynamic model, which was the first complete attempt to explain the function of a hot carrier solar cell. To establish such a cell with these predicted efficiencies, Ross and Nozick proposed that one need to achieve the following two objectives. 1. Prevent the photocarriers from thermalizing to the band edges by emission of optical phonons, and 2. Extract only the hot carriers into the contacts through an energy-selective contact. In the same year, even more progress was made in that area of research. Werfel studied the chemical potential of radiation, introducing the idea of the chemical potential for photons in a semiconductor under steady-state conditions. This became a very popular idea in the description of how a possible hot carrier solar cell could be created. Years later, in 1997, he further researched and detailed the thermodynamical concept of a hot carrier solar cell. It excluded virtually any energy loss mechanism of hot carriers, making it highly efficient, thus introducing the world to the potential of the third generation of photovoltaics. The hot carrier cell became more focused on by the larger scientific community as a real possibility. In order to understand hot carrier solar cells, we could take a look at the band structures for electrons and phonons in a typical bulk material. This is the figure showing typical creation of hot carriers and the thermalization process. We can look at the phonons created in these thermalization events. Normally, these phonons sit at the top of the energy and momentum band structure diagram. These phonons couple strongly to electrons, except that decay processes can occur, and in bulk materials, typical decay processes involve two lower energy phonons being emitted from a decay of this higher energy phonon, which is an energy loss mechanism. This is because the phonons at the top couple strongly to electrons. The ones that have dropped do not, and as a result they diffuse to the material and give rise to heat. So, we now need a way to inhibit this process. To inhibit the process, we now introduce a gap to the phonon band structure. If that gap is large enough, then there are no states available for the decay product phonons to go into. This means the decay is inhibited, and we have the opportunity for these phonons, at some later time, to be reabsorbed by the material and reheat charge carriers for extraction. These long phonon lifetimes are a result of a large phonon band gap in the material, which is a core principle of the operation of a hot carrier solar cell and what makes it so efficient. Understanding thermalization loss, we can now engineer a device which addresses this loss mechanism. A hot carrier solar cell can be thought of as a tank filled with hot particles. We want to make this tank as well insulated as we possibly can. Insulating in terms of electrons is easy. We just have to introduce some sort of barrier into the system. This barrier is provided by energy selective contacts, or ESCs. These ESCs are typically resonant tunneling structures, which have a very narrow bandpass for electrons. They act sort of like a valve for our tank, only allowing certain energies of electrons to pass. But if these particles are able to scatter with the walls of the container in our tank, then this can potentially lead to some kind of energy transfer to the material that is holding the charge carriers, in this case, the semiconducting material, which is acting as the absorber. and this can lead to thermalization loss, and ideally we would like to reabsorb this energy at some later scattering event. To insulate our tank against this thermalization loss, we need large phonon band gaps in the absorber material, so these phonons, which are created during scattering events, are long-lived. This causes the phonon population to stay hot. Indication of slow hot carrier cooling and hot photon effect have been reported for quantum well systems. This can be manufactured with 3,5 compounds with a large difference in their anion to cation masses, such as indium nitride, gallium nitride, and indium phosphide. We now know the two basic requirements necessary to accomplish extraction of high-energy carriers, and they are the absorber material, which has to slow down the thermalization of carriers by minimizing the carrier-to-phonon interactions, the energy-selective contacts, which have to allow extraction of carriers only in a very narrow range of energies. The calculation of limiting efficiencies for hot carrier solar cells has been a topic of research since the concept was first investigated by Ross and Nozick. In their work, they assumed that the number of carriers extracted from the device is equal to the difference between the incoming and the re-emitted number of photons. This approach, called particle conversion, led to efficiencies of 65% for non-concentrated solar radiation and 85% for full concentration. Using a more recent and realistic calculation for the efficiencies of hot carrier solar cells involving real potential materials shows a maximum efficiency of 43.6%, and this has been found for 1,000 sun solar concentration and energy extraction level of 1.44 eV. An efficiency of 52% was found for full solar concentration. The efficiencies are still nevertheless above the Shockley quasar limit and are high enough to encourage research of different phononic properties of different materials. In particular, engineering the phononic bandgap of nanostructure semiconductors can allow slowing down carrier cooling further in order to achieve significant efficiency gains. Hot carriers can be converted efficiently only if extracted in a very narrow range of energies. ESCs allow extraction of carriers in an optimal energy range. Ideally, this energy interval would be very narrow with a very high conductivity. Carriers with energies above or below the extraction range need to be reflected back into the absorber to renormalize within the hot carrier's distribution. Ideally, a discrete transmission level would give the best efficiency, but in reality, if the transmission energy window is very narrow, carrier extraction is insufficient to achieve reasonable currents. Either quantum wells or dots can be used to achieve this. Quantum well structures realized with a thin layer of gallium arsenide between two aluminum gallium arsenide barriers show optimal resonant tunneling properties for ESCs. On the other hand, ESCs devices based on silicon nanostructures have two main advantages. First, the relative simple realization process, given that there is well-developed silicon technology and experience with silicon dioxide material systems. Second, the real possibility of integration with a nanostructured absorber based on the same silicon dioxide superlattice. In addition, quantum dots allow better hot carrier selectivity compared to quantum wells due to confinement properties in 3 dimensions. A possible method of implementing ESC structures is by using the resonant tunneling properties of a single layer of quantum dots in a dielectric matrix. Silicon quantum dots in silicon dioxide matrices have shown theoretical and experimental evidence of being suitable for selective energy extraction of carriers. However, obtaining sufficient carrier extraction and energy selectivity using these structures is still a challenging task, since it requires a very high uniformity of the silicon quantum dot sizes in the matrix. Amongst bulk materials, 3,5 and 2,6 semiconductor systems appear to be good candidates to implement hot carrier absorbers, due to their phononic properties. In particular, indium nitride has also an optimum electronic bandgap to absorb most of the solar spectrum. The possibility of having an absorber layer based on bulk semiconductors is very attractive. This would keep processing a device reasonably simple, and it would minimize carrier transport related issues. Bulk materials show good absorption properties and can potentially be very well integrated with ESCs. The main drawback of using bulk absorbers is that, in general, the carrier cooling is ultra fast. The reason for this is that many bulk materials and compounds show either very small phononic gaps or no phononic gaps at all. Hence, it appears that indium nitride is the best solution to attempt the first realization of a bulk hot carrier solar cell absorber. since has suitable photonic and electronic properties. In addition, currently there is an established technology to deposit high-quality indium nitride layers using plasma-assisted MBE. Nanostructured semiconductors. The main problem related with realization of absorbers using bulk 3-5 materials is the fixed hot carrier cooling velocity and the rarity on the Earth crust of some of these materials, such as indium. Nanostructures semiconductors allow slower cooling in 3-5 superlattices and engineering photonic gaps in more abundant materials, such as group 4 elements. The dependence of hot carrier cooling time on the structure dimensions has been initially investigated in bulk gallium arsenide and quantum wells. Here is a table showing the design steps, requirements, and properties required to create a hot carrier solar cell. So this is how a potential hot carrier solar cell could look like. So this figure shows a simplified, unbiased Bayesian diagram of a possible implementation of a hot carrier solar cell. The hot carrier solar cell is constituted of a bulk indium nitride absorber and ESCs based on a gallium nitride indium nitride quantum well system. The figure also shows the carrier selective membranes for rectifying ESCs discussed. These membranes could be implemented using a doped high bandgap 3-5 semiconductor such as gallium nitride, which has a wide photon gap and can prevent thermalization. Holes and electrons are extracted to respective material contacts through gallium nitride, indium nitride, and gallium nitride quantum well structures, which act as a double barrier resonant tunneling device. The figure shows that a different width of a quantum well is necessary to tune extraction energy level of holes and electrons due to their differences in effective masses. Humanity faces a big challenge of sustainability. The need for efficient, abundant, and sustainable energy is paramount. The current trajectory would lead us to the consumption of untold amounts of resources, pollution using non-renewable energy, and a devastated planet in climate crisis. Hot carrier solar cells offer simplicity of design, low material and energy usage costs, and the ability to use abundant, non-toxic elements. Thus, hot carrier solar cells can implement a radical change in present-day solar cell technology by increasing the efficiency and reducing the amount of solar trash generated. By looking at the levelized cost economic evaluation, we could see that the cost of one hot carrier solar cell is 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour, compared to a levelized cost of one standard Canadian Tire solar cell, which is twice as much, which is about 3.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Thank you for listening to my presentation on hot carrier solar cells.